about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Dr. Boise Kimber, pastor of the First Calvary Baptist Church in New Haven, Connecticut. I am delighted this morning to have my dearest friend, Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, the pastor of the Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York, for the last 45 years. Dr. Richardson has written this book, A Witness to Grace. And we're going to be talking about this book this morning. And this book can actually be the bestseller. And I want you to read this book. This book has a lot of information about Dr. Richardson's life. One of the things that I was intrigued about is that Dr. Richardson was talked about being mad with God. And he talks about going on this road with God. And so we're going to be talking about this book. It is at Amazon. I have been reading this book. I am fascinated and intrigued about A Witness to Grace and about what Dr. Richardson has written about himself, his personal journey through life. So good morning to you, Dr. Richardson, and welcome this morning.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kimber. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to share with you on this context.
You're welcome. So really what I want to begin to talk to you about is when I first met you. I met you, well, let me back up. So in 1982, when Dr. T.J. Jemison became president of the National Baptist Convention, and you became his general secretary, I was in North Carolina, pastoring in North Carolina, was at the convention in Miami. And I remember we were standing down, like in a parking lot downstairs, looking up at you and Dr. Jemison, and you were holding the table that Dr. Jemison stood on. And so I don't know whether you remember Dr. C.C. Craig.
Yeah, sure.
C.C. Craig led the delegation of North Carolina to support Dr. T.J. Jemison. And subsequently, Dr. Jemison chose you as the general secretary. Fast forward in December of 1983, I was called to a church in New Haven, Connecticut. And in February of 1984, I invited you to come to preach our Ursher's anniversary. My contact with you was my aunt, A. Frances Kimber, who was the chairman. I don't know, was she the chairman at that particular time of your deacon ministry? But she was instrumental in having me to contact you, and you came to preach for us. And from then on, you invited me to your home. Subsequently, as a young preacher, I'm young back then. I got an afro, and I'm cool. and you invited me to your home, and I drove to your home in Scarsdale, and you began to talk to me. So let me say this, man, you have been my greatest mentor. You have helped me in my personal life. You have helped me in my ministry. I have taken a pattern from you. You went to Yale. I went to Yale. You're a Walker Fella. I'm a Walker Fella. I have watched your journey, man. And so this book is awesome. And the reason why I say it's awesome, Rich, is because I see you in this book. And my personal contact with you, this is a true book of your life. And so I wanted to start out with how I met you and what you mean to me.
Yeah, well, you've been a trusted companion and partner in my ministry. I really appreciate the role that you played and how you've always been there in the highs and the lows through all the campaigns that I went through. And you coordinated me. Some days you make me get up when I didn't want to get up to go campaign and so forth. But I certainly appreciate you, and I'm proud of what you have been able to accomplish in your own life and ministry. And I'm thankful to be able to, I mention you in the book because that's how important your input was and is in my journey. The years we spent in the National Baptist Convention, when I was General Secretary, you were right there as a primary assistant, and you had access to everything, and you developed a deep and abiding understanding of the dynamics of the National Baptist Convention, how it works and who it is. And you have quite a memory of the convention. Not many people who have a full memory of the convention, and you have that. And so it's delightful to talk to you this morning.
Well, I wouldn't have ever had the opportunity if you did not see something in me. You brought out stuff in me that I never knew was in me. And let me be very frank. At times you were hard on me. I want to say that too. But it made me better. It made me conscious of who you were and what I needed to be by being with you. And so as a young preacher, you groomed me, you molded me into where I am at this stage. Let me ask you a couple of questions here. I want you to talk about how did you come up with this theme, and why did you outline this in your book, this theme?
Well, when I about 3 years ago now, I had surgery, major surgery, that came out very successful, but it caused me to have some time for introspection. And I said to myself that I needed to capture my journey, that this was a time to reflect and also to try to tell my story so I could pass it on to the next generation, because I had benefited so much from the generations that preceded me. And so I felt an obligation to pass it on to the next generation, to pass it on to my colleagues, to get my story on record. And when I began to reflect on it, the constant that I kept coming upon was that there was the grace of God that has sustained me through all of the mountains and peaks, the valleys, the peaks and the pits, the valleys and the mountains that I've gone through, I was escorted by the grace of God. And so that kept coming back and forth. And so what emerged was this idea that my life has been a witness to grace and a testimony to the favor of God.
Excellent. Let me ask you this. What are some of the valuable lessons that you learned in life and that became a part of your ministry?
Foremost and most prominent and foremost is the fact that I have learned that you cannot understand what God is doing in your life in the immediate situation. Because sometimes when we're in the valley, we don't understand that that's preparation for a mountain that God has up ahead for us. And one of the things that I'm clear about is, as I look back over my journey, I see the disappointments, I see the valleys, I see the heartaches. But as I keep walking, I begin to see those heartaches as a part of preparation. The setbacks have been setups. And I begin to see how God works in that way. And when I talk about grace, you can't see grace going forward. You go forward in faith. You look down the road in faith and you walk towards the future in faith. But you look back over your shoulder and you see grace. And then you understand how God's fingerprint and hand has been on your life. And that's what so the most prominent thing I discovered was that this functioning of God in the midst of sickness, in the midst of betrayal, in the midst of disappointment and brokenhearted and failure and not success, all of it had come together to the grace of God to deliver me to where I am today.
So, you got this grace thing. You got Grace Baptist Church at Mount Vernon. You sang Amazing Grace before the sermon, whomever is going to preach every Sunday. And so grace has been embedded in you. And I cannot see this book being anything else but a witness to grace.
Yeah.
So that we're in this pandemic, man. And there is this racial unrest. How do you define grace in this pandemic, and what is, you've defined grace, but this pandemic and this racial unrest in this season, how do we deal with that as a people?
I wish that I could read to you page 211 and following to talk about, because I came upon the pandemic in the book after I could not release the book in April because the publishers were shut down and the distributors were shut down. So that gave me some more days and months to reflect on it. And I began to ask that question you just asked. Where is the grace of God in the midst of the pandemic? And what I discovered was it led to questions. Questions like, what is God sent this pandemic to cause us to reset and refocus? Is the pandemic come to show us that the things that we used as walls to define humanity are simply fake walls, like nationality? The pandemic showed us that it doesn't make no difference what nation you live in. The pandemic showed us that it makes no difference what color you are, what race you are, what class you are. That the pandemic illustrated it. Also, the pandemic illustrated our vulnerability. And could it be that God had deposited in the DNA of our humanity that when a certain level of corruption was achieved, or this maldistribution of wealth, or abuse of the climate could have, and when that would happen, this virus would kick in so that it would save us from ourselves? Is the pandemic a function of grace? Has it come for us to ask the question, do we start again or do we start over? And I think the big question will be, when we finish this pandemic, will we go back doing the same old things, or will we have learned some lessons as God has set us down and made us skilled that we can change our lives and change our relationships to one another and make this world a more wholesome and loving place? So that's the question. The question becomes, are we going to start over again, or are we going to just start up and go back to what we were?
What would you suggest?
Well, I suggest that we start over. I suggest that we reevaluate how we have viewed the world, our global consciousness, how we view other people. I think it's a mandate. I think it's no mistake that the Black Lives Matter re-emerged in the midst of the pandemic, because it's one of the great flaws in the humanity of America, racism. So it's right for it to show up. Our sense of indestructibility is challenged in this hour. And so we ought to start back with a greater humility about who we are and our own existence, that we're not here forever. It ought to point out to us that we are citizens of the world and not just citizens of one nation. So I think there are many ways in which we start over again in our personal relationships. It's an opportunity for us to revisit how have we been living our own personal lives. And then if we consider those things, we can't just start back. We got to start over, having been through something which I think has been a radical challenge, a pause to refocus and reset our humanity.
That's excellent. I don't know, and maybe there are other people out there, but I don't know too many people that have this global experience that you possess. And I want you to talk about your global experience and how you used your experience to help National Baptists and help Black people in general.
Well, boys, I grew up in Philadelphia, which was, and my world was maybe 10 blocks, 20 blocks. Maybe my world was 20 blocks. And I went on to Virginia Union and went on to school. I still didn't have a real global consciousness. My global consciousness, as most of the things in my life, have come as a result of the mentors that God has sent from time to time. And my global consciousness was awakened by Y.T. Walker, who we all cherish and who've been blessed by his ministry. He was a global citizen. He was the chief of staff for Martin Luther King Jr., but he was a global citizen. He was involved. He and I got locked up on apartheid in New York at the embassy. I mean, I've had a long journey. And then I became secretary of the National Baptist Convention, and wow, it blew wide open. Dr. Kimber appointed me as the ecumenical officer in addition to being general secretary. So in 1983, my first meeting was at the Vancouver World Council of Churches gathering, where I was elected to the Central Committee. Well, that just blew the whole door open, because that was 150 different countries and 400 million Christians. And I was on the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches that led me all over the world, into the Soviet Union, into Australia, into South America, and Argentina, and Switzerland, and Geneva, just all over the world as a result of that. And that opened my eyes. It opened my eyes to see this, Dr. Kimber. It opened my eyes to see that the window to God that each of us has is not an exclusive window. That it's not the only window. Now, I'm satisfied with my window. I view God through the prism of Jesus Christ. I'm totally satisfied with that. But I have no need to put other people's vision down, because they got different windows. And I learned that in my engagement as I talked to the Orthodox and to the Muslims and to the Catholics and to all the denominations in the world. And I began to see that I'm happy with my window, but there are other windows by which people come to know God, Buddhists and other, and I'm not willing to, in the name of the Make My Faith ballot, to dismiss their experience. If they're adequately satisfied, then I'm satisfied. But the point I'm trying to make is, ecumenism is not only the tolerance of other people's religion, but it is the affirmation of their validity. And so I believe that there are other windows, there are many windows by which we see God. And if you have not found a window to see God, I invite you to find a window to see Jesus, to see God through Jesus. But if you found it and you're satisfied, I affirm you. You understand? So yes. For me, ecumenism is us opening up the world to the tolerance of each other. We don't need to destroy other people of goodwill, of advocates of love and peace. That's Jesus. Wherever you see love and peace and grace and forgiveness and tolerance and patience, that's Jesus. And so we celebrated in all of its manifestations.
I often say to you, you are my horse. and I make that because you have been able to get into all venues, ecumenical groups around the world. And you are one of the individuals that I admire that can speak and preach to any occasion. And some of us just have one way of speaking, but you have been blessed to speak to all occasions, whether the room is full of corporate people, whether the room is full of whites, Hispanics, you name it. The Lord has given you a gift to speak to all races, ethnicity, groups of people, and that is a blessing that I have come to admire about you. Let me ask you about the boards in which you serve on, and how did you come about being chairs of these 3 different boards that you're a chair of?
Well, let me say, I'd say when people ask me that question, boys, you know, one of the things that gets me is that I see myself the product that I mentioned it a little earlier of mentors who entered into my life in different phases. And those mentors brought with them different horizons and different opportunities. And as I followed those mentors, it led to different situations. For instance, I was a student of Virginia Union, but A.B. James was the dean of the School of Theology when I went there, and undergrad vice president. So I was shepherded into an appreciation for education, sometimes resistantly, by Dr. James. And then that led to my love for Virginia Union, because Virginia Union gave me an opportunity to open up a world that I never knew nothing about, and open up my mind to the world of the mind. And consequently, I ended up being the chairman of the board of Virginia Union by just my love for Virginia Union and being embraced by those I came in contact. As a matter of fact, Y.T. Walker was on the board of Virginia Union when they invited me to come on the board. And he became one of my greatest advocates to become chairman of the board. And so I know that's a mentor. Then I got involved through the National Baptist Convention. I was appointed ecumenical officer. I ended up representing us on the Conference of National Black Churches at Dr. Jimmelson's appointment. And they embraced me across the year. And then Bishop John Hurst Adams came in and he mentored me. He's the senior bishop of the AME Church. He was not Baptist, but he took me on and affirmed my participation in the ecumenical movement. And he stepped down from being chairman and nominated me to be chairman of the CNBC. So I followed John Hurst Adams. The National Action Network, again, I was on the board of the National Action Network because Y.T. Walker put me on the board. And then when Y.T. Walker became ill, stepped down, he recommended to the board that I become chairman, and I've been chairman for now 15 years of the National Action Network. When I developed a friendship with Earl Graves, and Earl Graves led me to a greater involvement in corporate America and understanding the importance of corporate America on the plight of Black people. So he recommended me to the Pepsi board. From the Pepsi board, I was recommended to Comcast board. So it's always been the interaction of mentors. None of us can become fully what we ought to become without the participation of others in our lives. And those others are expressions of God's grace. If we just see that person, we have missed the full picture. The full picture is that we have seen the grace of God in the help that God sent through other people.
And that is powerful. I remember, and we're getting ready to close, I remember a sermon that you did, The Debt I Owe.
Yeah.
And we all of us owe somebody for where we are today.
Yeah.
And I admit that I owe you a great gratitude in respect from myself to you for what you've meant to me in ministry and not only in ministry, but personally. Let me say this, that I think that this is a powerful read, a powerful book. This is, Cyber Week. This book, normally $27. It is $16.95. I'm asking you to purchase this book. Dr. Richardson is still a member of the National Baptist Convention, a financial member of the National Baptist Convention. Our present president, Dr. Jerry Young, has a copy of this book that Dr. Richardson has sent to him. And he's talked about this book. Derry Jackson, who is the executive director of our Sunday School Publishing Board, has a copy of this. What I want to say to my brothers and my sisters that are listening, it is so important that we support one another. And this book will be taught in HBCU seminaries. Yale has already purchased the book. And I didn't talk about Yale, but man, you're plastered all over Yale wall there at Yale Divinity School for your work, for your community activism, for your church. Yale did a big article on you in this book. And so I don't think you can get any better. So yeah, I want to push the book because one, I think it's a great read. Two, W. Franklyn Richardson has been, still is a mentor and friend. And I offer this to our brothers and sisters across the nation. Thank you, Dr. Richardson, for being my guest today. I certainly appreciate you and our final words from you.
Thank you, Dr. Kimber. I appreciate your embrace of my book and of my journey.